Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful uptown Minneapolis, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. It's time for another book club episode. This time, producer Parker Seaman chose The Life After Cars by Sarah Goodyear, Doug Gordon, and Aaron Napperstack. And Gordon was available to join us for this episode. Take it away, Parker.
Doug, you want to say hello?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. Our previous book was Lost Cause by Cory Doctorow, which he did tell me to tell you that he says hello. He likes this.
We love Cory. He's, such a nice, smart guy and one of the best writers on sort of just tech and social issues you can imagine. So that's very nice of him.
Certainly.
He insisted that we make sure that we say the line, "Geometry hates cars," at least once on the episode.
That is I often say cars in cities are not a technology problem, they're a geometry problem.
Yeah.
But Cory, being Cory, has just a better way of saying things in shorter, better language. So geometry hates cars. We could do an entire episode just on that phrase. And he's so smart, and I love that he has sort of brought that coinage into the lexicon.
As somebody who reads his blog and listens to most of the podcast appearances that he makes, I hear him say the same sound bites many, many times, and I get to hear them as he tweaks them ever so slightly to get to that crystal, in the end.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that we got to talk to him about a 3-year-old book, so that the stuff that he was talking about with us was totally different from what I've been hearing him talk about, over the last 4 months.
Yeah, it actually might be interesting for us to do a round of publicity for Life After Cars in 2 or 3 years and see what, if anything, has changed. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we get too much into the questions, tell us a little bit about the book. What was the process writing it like? Just, give us some
And why write a book when you've got, the podcast that's been going for so long? And, what need did it fill that the podcast wasn't filling?
Yeah, I'll take that first. We had sort of thought about writing a book. A book is just a different medium. It's a different way to reach different people. The podcast, especially being called The War on Cars, attracts one type of listener, consumer, right? Whereas a book still has, first of all, a little bit of a cachet. I mean, I find it kind of funny that you can have a podcast that reaches, tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, but somehow writing a book, even if it reaches fewer people overall, if you have a podcast that gets 1 million downloads in the first day, right? There's something important about a book. You can hold it in your hand. You can deal with it at your leisure. Sometimes people listen to podcasts over the course of a couple of days, but a book you can read in one sitting. You can read it over the course of a month. You can go back to it and find that one passage that you found to be very important or meaningful for you, use it as a reference book, whatever you want. And so we felt like it was just a new way to reach a new audience. And because the title is Life After Cars and not the more combative The War on Cars, it's more of an invitation to imagine a different way of living, of ordering our society or your lives, so that it's not as focused around, this 2 or 3 ton death machine that we require everyone to have just to be a fully enfranchised member of society. So, writing the book felt important in that sense. And then, the process was a combination of different things. Some of it is material that we collected over the course of many, many podcast episodes. We were pulling stuff from transcripts and quoting guests that we had. Some of it was new material. I went to the city of Ghent in Belgium originally with the intent of doing that as a podcast episode, but we found that it worked better as a chapter in the book. And so that was it was a mix of pulling all this old stuff that we have, but doing a whole lot of new research. Sometimes on a podcast, you can just talk. And if you throw in a few facts, great. The book really has to be, if you read it, and you've read it, you'll notice we have a very extensive bibliography and endnotes, a ton of endnotes, because we really wanted to make this very tight case for why cars are bad, or at least why forced car dependency is bad. And it was a great process. It was a real fun learning process, but a ton of work at the same time.
Like, what are the major goals of the book? You said, we're bringing in a new audience. Like, what should people expect to get out of the book when they pick it up?
Yeah, I think, that we tried to design the book so that if you are a person who knows everything about the subject, you're an advocate, you write to work, you are a member of your local advocacy organization, you consume all of the books, all of the podcasts, all of the material about the subject. We tried to make the book so that there would be something in there for you. At the same time, we were really trying to reach new audiences, like I said, and speak to the person who knows nothing about the subject or very little and is just a little curious, like, oh yeah, they're starting to put bike lanes in my city. I wonder what that's all about. Or I read something about congestion pricing in New York, and why are they going after cars? I'm curious about that. That's always been the trick with the podcast. Like, we know the people who are tuning in to listen are a combination of those two groups, the people who know everything about the subject, the people who know very little. And when I say people who know very little, I don't mean like they're dumb. I don't mean they're unintelligent. I just mean they're busy people who've never given much thought to this. Maybe they're really into some other issue, right? And so that's really was the goal with the book, is number one, to equip the experienced advocates with a little new information that they might need the next time they go to a community meeting or go to a rally or call their elected official to make the case for why they should put a bike lane on their street or invest in new transit, to help them with language. A lot of this is really related to how do we talk about this stuff in the public sphere, on social media, in a public meeting. And then for the uninitiated, just to make the case of like, here is this massive force in your life, cars, that you have never probably given all that much thought to because no one's ever forced you to. It's all around us. As we write in the book, it's the water we're swimming in. None of us have known any different. None of us alive today have known a life before cars. So just getting people to see that cars are a problem that can be solved, and that should be solved, that's our goal. I don't want to spoil anything for folks who haven't read the book, but when you get to the end and we offer some solutions or advice on what to do, we tried not to be too big. We really tried to say, like, here are the achievable things you can do, because we didn't want someone who's new to this to read it and be like, okay, cars sound terrible. What can I do? Oh, crap. Like, I cannot defund the U.S. Department of Transportation and have them reallocate all their resources to bike lanes and transit. I can't, demolish a highway in my city. So we wanted to give some like real practical stuff that everyday people could do.
As one of the like jaded foot soldiers in the war on cars, when I came to the book, you're right, there's a lot of information in there that like I hadn't heard a lot of these specific stories before, and yet I still was like, well, I know the ending of this is going to be, well, it's all cars' fault, and cars suck, and here's another way that like I just assume like already like, oh yeah, cars are just the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all understand, especially if we're cyclists or advocates for public transportation and walking. Like, we understand the health aspects and the safety aspects, the fact that 40,000 plus Americans die every year. We understand the connections to climate change and pollution and things like that, but we might not have as big an understanding about things like noise pollution or the effect on animals, non-human animals, I should say. And so those are some of the things we wanted to include in the book.
Yeah. And a lot of those are like kind of important for people to be able to reference, as like, electric cars become a bigger and bigger, piece of conversation, and like family members are going to be like, oh, hey, like, what do you think about, switching out the combustion engine car for an electric car? That solves all the problems, right? And it's like, well, if you don't have those talking points ready, then like, you're not going to be prepared for that conversation. But the book brings up a lot of like different scenarios where it's like, okay, if I can keep all these things in mind, then I can be more ready for those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, to get back to the point that Cory Doctorow made about geometry hates cars, like electric cars have their place, right? And yeah, you are going to hear from those relatives who say, look at me and look at what I'm doing. I bought a Tesla. I bought an electric SUV. But, as we write in the book, if I'm hit while riding my bike by an electric car, I don't look up to the heavens as I'm breathing in my last breaths on this earth and say, thank God, it was an electric car. How wonderful that is for the environment. Cars take up space. They're dangerous. We also know that electric cars aggravate some of the problems that we see with cars. They're heavier, so there's more wear and tear on the roads. They shed more tire particles, which go into our water supply, and we breathe them in when they are kicked up as dust. They're very resource intensive, but they're just a different kind of resource intensive. That being said, like, we should electrify every vehicle that is out there on the road today, but we have to move towards fewer cars, not different cars.
It's a frustrating predicament because you have to say, in a certain sense, yes, I guess electric cars do improve one aspect of the myriad of problems that cars cause. And also, we already have a lot of solutions out there to fix the other problems that cars have, including density and toxic waste in various forms and all these other sort of things. It's like just going for electric cars doesn't necessarily remove those problems. It just transforms it into one that looks better, but isn't really an improvement necessarily.
Yeah, and there's the whole Jevons paradox, right? Like, if I'm not worried about gas prices and filling up at the pump, am I driving more, right? Because I'm charging my Tesla or whatever via solar panels on my roof. And so therefore, the cost to me to drive is negligible after I've paid for the car, of course. But, so I think that's a thing we have to consider with electric cars. And the other thing is, so a point my co-host Sarah Goodyear likes to make, you'll hear a lot of people talk about electric vehicles when what they mean is electric cars.
Right.
Because an e-bike is an electric vehicle, an electric bus is an electric vehicle, a train that runs on electricity, that's an electric vehicle. Those are the kind of EVs that society should be doubling down and tripling down on.
And no matter how many headlines we get about electric bikes are mitigating way more carbon dioxide emissions than electric cars, like the grand majority of people still aren't thinking about that, right? As like the same category of like, oh, this can fit a slot in your life.
Exactly. And look, if you are buying an electric vehicle, electric car, because that's what works for you and your budget, like, great. Like, I'd rather, if you're driving a car, it be electric, but it's not the be all end all to our mobility and environmental and social problems.
On the note of mentioning Jevons paradox, because this sounded familiar, there was a research paper that I saw somebody post on Blue Sky. The claim that the paper makes is that with every 1% increase in fuel efficiency is associated with 1.2% increase of vehicle miles traveled.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I'd be really curious to see the research, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is entirely true because, yeah, if especially now, I mean, we're essentially at war, and gas prices just today, as we record this, have spiked by like 50 cents. If you've got an electric vehicle and you're charging in some way where you're not affected by volatility and energy prices, then yeah, like, you're not going to change your habits. And in fact, you might change your habits in the way we don't want you to, which is to drive more. Which
then I think there's a positive corollary, converse, I'm not a scientist, to that, in that, well, like we were talking about at the start of the episode, the weather's really nice out, and I'm seeing a bunch of more people bicycle. You add more infrastructure for riding bike or making transit accessible, then people will start using it. No, that's induced demand. That's not the paradox. Never mind.
Well, no, but like, I think it's a good one. I was about to say, induced demand is, we tend to associate that with highway widenings and it being a bad thing, that you can never widen a highway and alleviate traffic because it just leads to more traffic, more people fill up the empty road space, and eventually you're back to where you started. But induced demand can work in good ways, like building a bicycle lane, a high quality bicycle network, or providing more frequent and reliable transit service. And you create this virtuous cycle where exactly more people say, hey, more people are biking, more people are taking transit, it feels safer. There's the safety in numbers effect we know with cycling, even in the absence of good bike infrastructure, where you are safer if there are more cyclists on the road. So, we just want the good kind of induced demand, not the bad.
So Going back to the book a little bit, because you mentioned earlier the story when you're abroad, not working in the podcast, and instead going into the book, and there's a lot of stories and different angles you take in the book. So talk a little bit what the process for sourcing those stories were. Given that you're a podcast and do interviews, I imagine you're calling on a lot of previous experience, but like, what was the process for like deciding what gets put in there like?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of writers and a lot of people who author books, the process of writing the book was almost a process more of unwriting and editing more than a process of writing. It just, the many drafts that we went through, the book is about 60,000 plus words, so about 6,000 words per chapter. And there are some chapters, that I took on, such as the childhood chapter, that I think were 3 or 4 times that amount when I just got everything out, because the subject is so big, so diffuse, it changes so quickly all the time. So that process was really like, we sort of sat down and mapped it all out, and we're just like, all right, first we have to make the case for why cars are bad before we make the case for what can change and how it can change. Yeah, so if you notice, the first part of the book is really like how cars ruin everything. Like that's it. And then we had to break that down into things like cars ruin childhood and all the effects that we've seen. The fact that in the late 1960s, about 40% of kids biked or walked to school, and now that's down to 11% or less. And why that happened and how that happened, and the places that are like the bike bus movement that are trying to turn that around. Cars ruin nature, and all the ways in which we were mentioning before, like particulate matter, especially from tires, is getting into our water supply and streams and killing salmon. Cars ruin society. We've seen, cities, especially you all being in the Twin Cities, right? And everything that's been going on, the ways in which cities become these bulwarks against fascism and protectors of democracy, and how that's different when you live in a place where everything is sprawled out and you don't know your neighbors as well, and community is defined more by who you already know than the proximity to people unlike you. Like one of the things I love about Minneapolis, right, is it's like all of these different people, immigrant communities, people who've been in this country for generations, and everybody in between, like coming together to support each other. And I think that happens in part, not just because Minnesota is a special place, but I do think it happens a little bit because of the built form of Minneapolis. I think that's really true. So, not to take away from what's special about Minnesota, but like the fact that you have a city that's like relatively easy to get around and has made improvements in that, and has neighborhoods where like the houses are not that far apart and there are apartment buildings mixed in, like we felt was really important to say, like, cars have an effect on democracy and society. So we wanted to put that in. And then, we pivoted later to like, here are the places that are doing it right. Here are some design concepts that work, and can be applied to your city, even if it is a big sprawling place. So, yeah.
How do you think that this book would have happened if the podcast, hadn't already happened? Like, if you didn't have that history?
Probably not. I mean, the thing about the publishing industry, being what it is, and we had nothing but a good experience with Penguin Random House, our publisher, and our editor, Megan McCormick, was wonderful. Like, it's a cliche, just like all of her notes improved the book so much, and it's really true. But obviously, part of what attracted her and Penguin Random House and our agents to the idea of a book was that we had this platform. We had a built-in audience for the book that we had built up on the podcast since 2018. And so we knew that like that core group of people would probably be interested in purchasing the book, and that it would help us then branch out and get more publicity elsewhere. So it is true, like having a platform, especially in a nonfiction environment for publishing, really does help a lot.
Given that we all, given the audience here and on your podcast, we all agree cars are bad. So how do you decide what other forms of transportation fit well into the book that are worth discussing?
Well, obviously, I come from a bike advocacy background. That was really my entry into this subject. So cycling features prominently in the book in the latter part, especially when we're talking about the city of Ghent in Belgium and how they were able to increase cycling by so much. I think talking about bus riders, we locally have been talking about bus a lot, thanks to Zoran Mamdani and his campaign pledge to make buses fast and free. So that seemed really important. We didn't want to be too prescriptive. Like, we wanted to basically say, if you can figure out a way in your town to reduce the number of cars coursing through it, the benefits will be more than you can name. And what works in one place is not necessarily going to work elsewhere, and the goals shouldn't be the same everywhere, in terms of like types of bike lanes or transit systems or things like that. But rethinking our relationship with the automobile, that should be what we want to start with. Because in a lot of places in this country, even in places where it is possible to live car free or car light, those people who do live that way are still in the minority. Even in New York, we still have huge fights over parking spaces. And you would think that car drivers were the majority here in Manhattan and Brooklyn, when the opposite is true. So, just getting people to see the problem and the outsized influence that cars have in our lives and our society, that's the real mission of the book. If there's a follow-up book, then we maybe could get into even slightly more prescriptive solutions. But the other thing is, because we wanted the book to speak to so many people, we didn't really want to get too prescriptive. As I mentioned before, we wanted the end of that book to feel like whether you lived in Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, or New York, or some tiny town in the middle of nowhere, that you could at least do the same things we all can do, which is call your elected officials, talk to your neighbors, find that one person in town who shares your ideas and your beliefs about, hey, maybe it should be a little safer to walk or bike places. So we do talk about design changes, but like neck downs and bulb outs and protected bike lanes are going to be a solution in some places, but not in every place. So we didn't want to really tell people this is what you should be doing.
Right. The incredible power of just showing up.
Just showing up. Exactly. Like that. If those of us who really care about this issue or have sort of had that inkling that something's not right with how we've designed all of this and what is required of us to participate in the world around us, if we just show up, then that is going to change a lot and move the needle in ways that are going to look different in rural America versus urban America versus suburban America versus exurban America, and all the different ways we define suburbs, of course.
It's still like so easy to get paralyzed, like when you're first entering an advocacy space, to get paralyzed with the like, well, I don't have all of the answers, so I don't know if I should even say anything, like when I was first getting introduced to the bike advocacy, community here in the Twin Cities, like I was coming from a place of like, oh my gosh, the city wants to know what I have to say about where to put painted bike lanes. That's amazing. I love painted bike lanes. And I had no idea that like the research had already moved on to, hey, painted bike lanes like really do not help you at all. We need to be doing curb protected or, like parking protected, so like I didn't have the kind of language to talk about the specifics, but I also like, bless my little heart, I didn't know that I didn't have the words to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, knowing what you know and don't know is a really important part of being a responsible and good human being, but also a good advocate, and entering the space saying, I bet there are people who know more than I do, and I should talk to them or read them or listen to them. That's a really important thing. I will say, just to channel my podcast researcher hat, painted bicycle lanes, as much as we all complain about them if we ride regularly, they are better than nothing. Now, sharrows are a different story. There have been studies that show that they're essentially worthless, if not worse than worthless. But painted bicycle lanes, you think about it, if you had like a 14-foot road and you put in, a 4-foot wide painted bicycle lane, now suddenly the drivers have a narrower, lane, their visual field has changed. And there are studies that show that they do make things safer. Of course, like we would rather have non-door zone bike lanes and have them be protected.
Yeah.
But like that's that was part of the fun and the research of like challenging beliefs that I had or intuitions that I had of like, oh, this is not as simple as like I'd like it to be. But I've been doing advocacy for a really long time, 16 years plus, and I'm still learning stuff, and I'm always open to being challenged about what I believe, because the science changes, the knowledge changes, who's in the conversation changes, all of those things.
Yeah. And we can't let like the fear of not getting it perfect prevent us from like doing good.
Right. And sometimes, this also boils down to politics. And so your DOT in your city, wherever you live, whether it's Minneapolis or New York, they may look at you behind the scenes. If you have a good relationship with some of the planners, they may look at you as people have said to me, and say, this is the best we can do right now. We agree with you. We know, these planners are smart. They've been to Amsterdam. They know all the things. But they may look at you and say, if we try to put in a protected bicycle lane, it'll get shot down and then you'll get nothing. And worse than that, the next project will be jeopardized too.
Yeah.
So sometimes you got to play that game, and it sucks because people's lives are at stake. Right. And it's not just people's lives, but it's like, what kind of future we want to build. It's, can kids ride? Can older people ride? Can less confident riders ride? So that's the advocacy game. It's like, it's compromise.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break in the parklet. Today we have an urbanist quick question from John. Now that we have the Idaho stop in Minnesota, do the stop signs at trail crossings not apply anymore? So, the way that the Minnesota version of the Idaho stop works is that cyclists essentially treat stop signs the way that motorists treat yield signs. Aside, we didn't pass the stop light part of the Idaho stop, but in Minnesota we already had a law that cyclists can proceed through a red light if they have stopped and if they have a reasonable suspicion that the light isn't going to change for them and if there's not any cross traffic coming. So we already sort of had that. All right. For the little stop signs facing towards trails that are crossing a road, they do still mean something. They inform the cyclists that the crossing traffic is not going to stop. Because, there are some trail crossings where the cyclists have the right of way. There are some trail crossings where the motorists have the right of way. And in this case, anywhere that you see a stop sign that is facing towards the trail, towards the cyclists who are crossing the road, that tells you, okay, the cross traffic is not going to stop. The cyclist is the one who is expected to stop if there is any cross traffic. But if there isn't any cross traffic, then John is right that the cyclists don't actually need to come to a complete stop. So, realistically, all of those stop signs could just be yield signs. And there you go. What's one story or like piece of research from the book that really sticks with you?
I've mentioned it a couple times, but my Ghent being one. That is a city of about 240,000 people. It's a big university town. If you can kind of picture a smaller Amsterdam for folks who've been there, that's what Ghent is a little bit like. And, they did so much. I spoke to Philippe Watteau, who's the deputy mayor, essentially deputy mobility minister, sort of their transportation director. And they instituted a very famous traffic circulation plan to reduce the number of cars using the city as a cut through. And they spent no more than 5.8 million euros to institute this program that, after many years of planning and studying and community outreach, they essentially implemented over one weekend in 2017. And it led to a huge drop in the number of crashes. It led to a huge drop in air pollution. They met their 2030 cycling goals within 2 or 3 years. It was pretty incredible. That experience showed me that none of this has to be complicated. None of this has to be expensive. Many cities have an excellent bike lane network that exists already. It's just all the cars are all over it. And if we could just reduce the number of cars, that would be a great way to do it. No special infrastructure required. That's one. I think the other one for me that really sticks out is I wrote for the chapter on childhood, and I had done an episode on this. My co-host Sarah had interviewed Sam Balto, who's one of the big bike bus organizers, sort of like the godfather of the bike bus movement in this country. And I rode with the Montclair, New Jersey bike bus, and riding with like a couple hundred kids on their way to different schools. I will never forget that experience. And then interviewing those kids for the podcast and including some of their quotes in the book was great, because if there's one constituency that's really left out of city planning, children certainly are towards the top of that list. They don't come to the meetings, to yell about parking. Yeah.
Now, those were your favorite chapters from the book. Was there any notable stuff that got left on the cutting room floor, or anything that got left out just for editing purposes?
Oh, well, I
otherwise?
won't say those are my favorite chapters overall. Those are just like that I went out and reported, that I had an experience. I mean, I have other favorite chapters. Sarah did a lot of the work on the Cars Ruin Nature chapter. She had done some episodes on this subject. And to me, when I remember reading some of the early drafts, I was like, holy moly, even I'm sort of surprised by this. I can only imagine what the average reader will think. So it was really great to read that stuff. Stuff that got left on the cutting room floor, a lot. Like I said, I think we probably altogether wrote 3 times as much as we needed to fill the book. There were just so many stats from around the world in terms of like children's mobility. I keep coming back to that in terms of what we wanted to put in. The bike lash chapter was really hard to whittle down to 6,000 words because, first of all, like I started writing my old blog, Brooklyn Spoke, as sort of a clearinghouse for swatting down bad anti-bike arguments. And so I had all of this stuff that I could have thrown in there and tried to. But it was just going to become too much of a list of like, when people say this is how you should respond. When people say that, this is what you should say. And we didn't want it to be that. Like that wouldn't have been interesting to too many people outside of the hardcore advocates. So if you read the book, you'll see how we folded the bike lash stuff and how people respond and what you should say and how to deal with it in less of a like, if this, then do that, less of a how-to. That originally that chapter was going to be like a how to respond chapter. Instead, it was more of like a psychological examination.
How much time did it take to research, write, and edit the whole thing?
Well, I worked backwards. So we published the book. It was a 9-month process of actual writing, of like really saying, okay, we are beginning the writing process, to the point at which we had to deliver it was essentially our first draft, but we had actually submitted a lot of chapters to our editor for a number of reasons. One of which is just like, you want to get stuff to your editor early, because then we could figure out the kind of notes that she would give and then be able to preemptively address stuff going forward. And that helped us write a better book, we hope. So it was about 9 months of actual writing. The research, I couldn't even tell you, because some of this is the like cumulative research that we all did over our careers. Sarah's been covering this for 20-ish years as a journalist. I said I've been an advocate for about 15, 16 years. Some of this stuff we were drawing from like old things that she had written, stuff I had put on the blog and wanted to re-examine. There was new reporting, of course. So that's like, if you totaled all that up, that would be years worth of research. But I mean, you can sort of see behind me, like I just have an endless amount of books on the subject, and we have a very long bibliography in there. So yeah, the whole process was a lot, and it was very intense. And in the final few months, I think I was working almost every day of the week to get it done. Yeah, but we felt a real sense of responsibility to get it right, because we felt like there have been books on this subject, but they're usually they have in the past been geared either to a specific slice of the subject, like Henry Gravar's book, Paved Paradise, which is phenomenal. That is a great book, but it's solely about parking. And there are other books that are solely about another slice of just cycling or whatever. We felt a great responsibility because we're like, this is going to sort of be like the catch-all book. And we also, much like with the podcast, we just respect our audience a lot. And we wanted to make sure we were delivering something good.
As part of that work, what was the process or what was it like for recording the audiobook version of it?
Yeah, Sarah and I read the book. It was split up evenly not necessarily split up by like who wrote what. It was literally just like you go, then you go, then you go, then I go, etc. We recorded that over the course of 2 days separately. And then there was another day where we came together to do, like, we read the intro and the conclusion together, but like split up paragraphs or pages, right? So it was exhausting. I came back from the first day of recording. I think I finished at like 3:30 or 4 after starting in the morning. And like by the time I got to about 3, the words didn't make any sense anymore. Like I didn't know what I was reading. People who do audiobooks for a living, people who do voiceover narration for documentary film or whatever, like I don't know how you do it over day after day after day and have the words make sense. So at that point, our producer was like, you got this. I know how much we have left. Go home, get some rest. We'll pick it up tomorrow. But it was a really fun way to do it because up until that point, I don't think I had read the book in one sitting. Like I had read drafts of chapters. I'd read this. I'd looked at notes when we got the final draft notes, but never really sat down and read it like a book. So it was fun.
Yeah. So in a time, in a point in history where there's a lot of pressing needs, how do you fit transportation advocacy, as part of your work that you're doing?
It's very hard. I mean, especially right now as we record this, it's like we're, indiscriminately bombing another country illegally and, and just immorally doing this and all of the problems we see with the federal government, with democracy in shambles and all the rest. And so many other big issues. Yeah, I can sort of feel like, well, why are we focused on bike lanes? It can seem so trivial or whatever. But I would make the case that our issues, number one, are really important because, where are people the most progressive? Where are they the most in contact with immigrants and with trans people and with people who are just different from them in any way that you define that? That's in cities a lot of the time. And so in many ways, what we're seeing, as you know very well, is an attack on cities, right? Minneapolis and the Twin Cities were under assault and still are in many ways by the federal government. Why? Because they are places where democracy thrives. They are places where, like I said, different people interact into and form a common project of, it's not always perfect, but it generally works. And that's a threat to fascists. When different people stand up for each other, even especially people who they don't know, who aren't technically part of their quote unquote community, that's a threat. And so when you can build good public transit, good public spaces, safe bicycle lanes so kids can bike to school, so, delivery workers can do their job safely, like these are good building blocks of democracy. So I see the war on cars and the bike advocacy movement, the pedestrian advocacy movement, the trans advocacy movement as a defense of democracy movement. I also see, having been doing this for a long time, where the movements were very siloed, 10, 15 years ago. That's not the case anymore. The parking reform network is really coming together, right? And understanding that housing prices are more expensive when we require parking from developers, or, how spread out things become when we have to build for the car first over the person. We're seeing the climate movement, the environmental movement, all of these movements that used to be very silent, all wrapped up in one thing. So it's hard to even separate what is the bike movement from the transit movement from all the rest. It's all part of the same thing.
Right. Suddenly we're a constituency, right?
We are a constituency for sure. And the other thing I would say is it is an achievable form of advocacy. There are others, but I can't reform the Supreme Court. I can write letters, to my senators saying, if you're ever in power again, Democrats, like, you better expand the Supreme Court. But I can't like politely knock on John Roberts' office and say like, hey, this executive immunity stuff that you've granted to Trump, like, could you rethink that? But I can knock on the door of my city council member and call her and say, there's a problem down the street from me. It's a really dangerous street. We should do something about it. So it's really achievable. And I think in this day and age, we need people to pick something Doesn't have to be transportation related, of course, but like something that feels achievable. And if we all do that, like little drops in the ocean, right, we'll fill all the available space and create something better. So that's sort of how I see our movement, as both interconnected to everything else that's important, immigration, housing, climate, affordability, but also democracy and just community building.
I think having transit be the center of all these sort of different needs and it growing into this constituency is kind of an inevitability. Not that the work to emphasize the ways that they are connected is going to happen without advocacy. It's rather that because of the way that they are all interconnected, it has made it apparent to people who are involved that they are all related, and all these sort of aspects of what it is being a person in a place touch on transit in one way or another, whether that's environmentalism, justice, just anything. It all intersects with transit. Not that that is always at the very center of it, but it is an aspect of it.
Right? Yeah, I think that's 100% right.
Yeah, and I think the inverse is true as well. Like when I'm looking at people who are running for local office, I can usually pay attention to just their take on like transportation issues and have about a 90% hit rate on knowing exactly where they're going to land on a bunch of other things that I care about, even if they seem like
absolutely.
They're unrelated.
Right. And
I think that's 100% true. I mean, there's a very good quote, a Joe Biden quote, where he says, don't tell me what your values are, show me what your budget is, and I'll tell you what your values are. And I think that's true about streets. Who politicians listen to when it comes to streets, right? Are they listening to the drivers who just care about their parking, or are they listening to the families and the individuals who've lost loved ones to traffic violence? Are they listening to bus riders who are stuck in traffic on their way to minimum wage earning jobs? Who do they care about? And I think you're right. Like, the people who are really good on our issues like transit and cycling probably are going to be really good on things like trans rights, immigrant rights, affordable housing, wages, and, having a minimum wage that actually can earn you a living. And I think that's a really good metric for it. It's about power dynamics and who elected officials listen to. The thing that has gotten me kind of the most encouraged in many ways is we have had an elected official on stage with us at nearly every live show we've done. We had some really good ones in Minneapolis when we were there in April. But since the book has launched, we've been to Houston, Texas. We've been to Austin, Texas. We've been to LA. We've been to Miami. And we've had some of the most car-centric places in North America. And in each of them, we've had elected officials who are like more to the left on some of these issues than I think I've ever been, which has just been great to see. Never did I think that would happen, but that's how progress happens. So it's good.
Do you think that we're making good progress in the war on cars, or overall, which direction are we headed? Are we heading in a good direction or not?
It depends how you measure it. I think politically, obviously, from a national point of view, we're in terrible shape, right? USDOT sucks. Sean Duffy sucks. They're canceling active transportation projects left and right. If it isn't a car, it doesn't burn gasoline in that car, they're not interested in it as a project. That's bad. Transit is in a death spiral in a lot of states and cities. We saw what happened in Pennsylvania with SEPTA and different systems throughout Pennsylvania. Even New York City is under assault. As we record this today, a judge just dismissed the federal government's lawsuit to stop congestion pricing. So that's good.
Okay.
But, it would be better if we weren't putting out fires all the time and instead had a federal government that was interested in like making it safer and more efficient to get around without a car. That's the political side of it and the governing side of it. I think culturally we've never been in better shape. Like the fact that this book, Life After Cars, exists when it might not have existed 5, 10, 15 years ago, that's a sign that something's changed. We have done some real mainstream media in terms of like, your wake up Seattle kind of morning shows, right? And we've had a really great time on them, and we've been surprised and delighted by the substance of the questions. We thought with a couple of them, oh, surely this is like suburban driver. That's the audience, suburban drivers. But the questions have been like, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if more people could like ride a bike to school or to work? So I think culturally, and the fact there's just a bigger constituency for all of these issues. The fact that here in New York, Zoran won on fast and free buses, as we talked about a little earlier. And that's not just a New York thing. We're seeing it. We're going to Atlanta, and we have a young Democratic Socialist city council member who's joining us. And she is like out there talking about making it safer for people to get around without a car in Atlanta, another car centric place. So I think culturally we're winning. And it's always the case. Jeanette Sadeghian, I think she has said that the people are always ahead of the politicians. And I think you're seeing that not just in our issues, but like, look at abolish ICE, right? That was like a radical or a leftist position mere months ago. And now you've got like my moderate congressperson, Dan Goldman, saying abolish ICE. Like, it's kind of wild how much that's changed. So, but I think it's just like one of many examples of the people get it. We just got to bring the elected officials along.
I think that's an excellent point you make in the book, too, of this is a great time to be involved and start showing up and just being a presence at a place that you don't have to know every aspect. You don't have to be involved in everything. But if you go to these sort of events and make your voice heard, you can have an incredible amount of say in what the future of that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we've joked in some places, like we've had, like we were in an audience of 1,000 people in Seattle. When we came to Minneapolis, I think it was like 400 people in the audience. When's the last time you went to a council meeting or a public meeting about bike lanes and there were more than 20 or 30 people there, right? So if there's so much room for 5 to 10 advocates or people who don't even consider themselves to be advocates to come to a meeting and dramatically shift the tone and focus of the conversation. So I think that gives me hope. And and also people are just so smart about these issues. Like we're finding so many folks in all the cities that we're talking to, like people who are not planners, people who are not, graduates of like architecture school or anything like that, who just have a high level of knowledge about that. That's really changed in the last little bit. So it's part of why I enjoy doing the podcast is I like to talk to people who are smarter than I am.
I love to tell people that like my role as the host is to be the dumb one in the room so that I can ask the questions that like, so that the audience members don't have to be the ones who are like, I feel dumb for having to ask this question. No, Ian had this question as well.
Yeah. I never like to say like that I'm dumb. It's more like I'm a stand-in for the audience.
Right.
I do my homework. I do my reading, Sarah and I have this dynamic on some episodes where it's fun where one of us has done all the research and the other has done none, because then the person who's done none especially is the stand-in for the audience and is asking those questions or anticipating where things are going, and there's some satisfaction of that. But like, no, that's
I
what
too
really gives
have
me
fond memories of yes no on Reply All.
Oh right, yep. But yeah, no, we've just had, and the questions we're getting from audiences at our live shows are really great and thoughtful, and it's just fun. It's really, this is a dark time, but it's really encouraging to speak to people who, my friend Mike Lydon, who's a planner, says, like we're all sort of pushing this big giant boulder up a hill, and some of us are going to be pushing it from different angles. Some of us are stronger than others. Others of us have a different way of thinking about like the levers we should be using to push that boulder up. So we're all bringing our skills to bear and our perspective to bear on this big boulder of progress that we're trying to move.
It's kind of beautiful and kind of a scary visual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but that's we do take some steps back. The boulder sometimes just slides back a little bit and you got to start over. That happens.
Yep.
All right. Favorite bus or train route in New York City?
So I like the Q train in New York City, which gets you so many places very quickly. It's a little bit of a walk from where I live, but I can pick it up with a transfer. And it does this kind of fun route that it also takes you through a lot of neighborhoods and communities where I used to live or work. So even though you're below ground, it's like, oh, there's my old stop. There's whatever. It's a great line. That's good. The F train in New York City, it kind of has a reputation of like the F stands for forever, but it takes you like along that line. You can go from my neighborhood to like deep into Queens and get some of the best South Asian food of different South Asian countries and cultures. Probably anywhere in the U.S. you can get some of the best food. So those two would be my favorite. Not too much love for the F train, but I love where it takes me.
Yeah. Do you actually have enough unique train lines to have used all of the letters A through Q?
This is so funny because my son is 13, and ever since I can remember, he's been fascinated with which letters are used. And there's actually like a children's musician who we love. You should look him up on Spotify. It's called City Stomp, and he has an ABCs of the trains. And he goes through all the letters. So like there's no I train because it looks too much like a one.
Sure.
There's no O train and no zero train because they look too similar. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that is kind of fun. Like we go through, why isn't there this train? There's no U train that I can think of. There are S trains, but they're not the same line because they're different shuttles, things like that. So yes, but we've got almost every letter, but not all.
Can we borrow your mayor just for a little bit?
Yeah, you can. We'll clone him. I'll try to get a piece of his. If security will get me close enough, let me get close enough. I'll grab a strand of his hair, and we'll have our best scientists work on cloning him. But
top men.
Yeah, I know there's been some interesting relationship with your mayor in Minneapolis, to say the least, on some issues. But, there's some other good mayors out there. Kitty Wilson in Seattle, she's a transit organizer. And nice. Now she's the mayor of like a pretty big and awesome city. So there's some bright spots out there.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I just want to extend my gratitude to everybody in the Twin Cities for doing what they've been doing. I know it's been really hard. I don't even know the extent to which it's been hard, but I'm in contact with friends and advocates and folks that I've met there. And, the organizing that we've seen is such an inspiration for the rest of the country, because we know a lot of this is going to come to the rest of the country if it hasn't already. And so, seeing what people are doing there. My niece and nephew live in Minneapolis, and I have a lot of friends in the area. And so I have occasion to visit now and then. And I just got to say, I love a lot of cities in the U.S., but Minneapolis holds a very special place in my heart. It's a good place.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And just for context for the audience who is going to be listening to this 3 months after we record it, we're recording this on March 3rd. So the ice occupation of the Twin Cities is very fresh on our memory right now. Hopefully, that will not be the most important thing on people's minds come 3 months from now.
If there's a city that deserves like a good stretch of nothing happening, I would say it's Minneapolis, and it's the Twin Cities for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Doug, for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for reading the book.
Yeah. Parker, is this the part where you tell everybody what the next book is going to be?
Normally, we got about halfway through this recording, and I thought, I should probably think about what I want for the next book. And then you said Paved Paradise, and I went, yeah, that's good enough. So the next
Paved
book...
Paradise is an excellent, excellent book. Henry Gabar, we've had him on the podcast, I think twice. He is an outstanding writer. I remember him saying when he was writing the book and he was on the show that like the War on Cars audience might be the only audience that hears a book about parking and doesn't like have their eyes roll back in their head. But it is such an entertaining and informative book. I highly recommend it if that's what you pick.
That is what we're picking. So look forward to that.
Nice.
Yeah. Enjoy it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for being here, Doug.
My pleasure. It was great to be here.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivative license. So feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was produced by Parker Seaman, edited and transcribed by Stina Neel, and was hosted by me, Ian R. Buck. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Streets.mn is a community publication and relies on contributions from audience members like you. If you can make a one-time or recurring donation, you can find more information about doing so at streets.mn/donate. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.